Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
St. Louis Public Radio's The Gateway gives you the day's news first thing every weekday morning. From the ever-evolving relationship between St. Louis City and County to developments in the Missouri and Illinois state capitals and reports from our correspondents in Rolla and the Metro East. We put it all in a roughly 10-minute package with clarity and context. Download The Gateway wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And that upset a lot of people, but it's First Amendment, free speech. And frankly, as a newsman, I think it's one of the things that makes it kind of fun.
So I got to just ask you point blank, is Webster Groves the queen of the suburbs?
It depends on what city I'm in. I'm in Kirkwood. I have to change my tune. You know, they made it look materialistic, that everybody's on the make, that all the kids have to toe the line so they can get good grades to go to great colleges. Meantime, they're ignoring what's going on around them. They're not protesting the Vietnam War. They're not engaged in civil rights. The parents came off pretty stodgy. But
do you think that was accurate, this portrayal in that documentary?
Oh, yeah.
I'm Sarah Fensky.
I don't think it's a bad thing for a town to be engaged in a little bit of self-analysis.
Webster Groves has been called the queen of the suburbs. Actually, it's more accurate to say that some Webster Groves boosters call Webster Groves the queen of the suburbs. So does it deserve the title? Well, few people are better equipped to answer that question than Don Corrigan. The longtime journalist was editor of the Webster-Kirkwood Times for 4 decades, and now his 8th book digs deeply into the community's history and lore. It's called Amazing Webster Groves. It's out now from Reedy Press, and Don Corrigan joins us today. Don, welcome.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk about Webster Groves.
That's right. This is a great topic for you. Great topic a lot of people have some interest in. So I got to just ask you point blank. Is Webster Groves the queen of the suburbs?
It depends on what city I'm in. I'm in Kirkwood. I have to change my tune.
Yeah, that's a hard job to be editor of the Webster-Kirkwood Times, right? Great rivalry.
I love that controversy, though, because Webster and Kirkwood go after each other. It's good-natured, but they go after each other on things like that. Which one's the real Tree City, USA? I love that one,
That's
too.
a great controversy.
Yeah.
So tell me this. What do you think is the single greatest thing about Webster Groves? What is the thing that ain't so great? Where could Kirkwood get the leg up?
Well, I'm biased naturally because I'm an educator, and so I just love Education Row. I mean, when you talk about Webster Groves High School, and you look across the street, there's Eden Seminary, then there's Webster University. Then a little further down is Narix.
It's all right there.
Yeah, and they're all beautiful buildings. They have history, and I love their mascots because their mascots are so bizarre. So that's one of the reasons why I had to include a section on their mascots.
Yeah, it was great in this book learning about the Gorlock because I got to admit, I'd always wondered what up with the Gorlock.
Yes, a lot of people wonder what up with the Gorlock. So I include in there all the student editors because I advise the Webster University newspaper, and they have all written about the Gorlock because, if nothing else, the sports program's distinguished by the weirdest mascot in America. It's always in the top 10.
Yeah,
So,
you got to love that. So you're digging into, you have some serious history in here, and I learned a lot about who was Lockwood. Why are steamboat captains settling in a landlocked suburb? But you also are really having a lot of fun in this book.
Yes, it's a fun book, and I love the cover because, they have Phyllis Diller, and they have the Gorlock, and they have the Narix Olympic soccer champ, and of course they have that big mouth Harry Carey.
He's a native.
My Chicago friends lose their minds when I tell them hey, Harry's ours, and it's not just St. Louis's, he's Webster Groves.
Yeah.
Because, they've spent years singing Take Me Out to the Ball Game and all that with Harry. And
Yeah.
I said, we were into that. We're way ahead of you on that, here in St. Louis.
That's right. Harry was here first. Yeah, I mean, you're really having some fun with this cover. It has like a tabloid feel to this. Under where it says Amazing Webster Groves, it says featuring Lady with a Chair of Bowleys, Fastest Man in America, and baseball's holy cow announcer. You're kind of signaling to people this is not your staid history book.
Well, it's kind of a lure to get people into the pages. But I think if you have a chance to look at it, like the chapter 2 is just all about North Webster and Black history,
Yeah.
which I'm very sensitive to right now with Juneteenth coming up.
Yeah, you really dig into there's a dark side here. This is not just everybody's leafiest pretty suburb. I mean, this was a place where you talk about the Douglas School.
But, the town, that's one of the things I really admire about Webster Groves is they're thoughtful people. And you really see that when you go through all the chapters of the personality profiles that I do. And, it's not their proudest moment, but it's not the proudest moment for the country.
Yeah.
The good thing about Webster Groves is they face up to that history. They teach that history. They're not afraid to talk about it, and that's one of the things I love about the people there.
So I got to talk about one part of more recent history. This is something that was one of the first things as an outsider I learned about Webster Groves, and that is this documentary, 16 in Webster Groves. CBS News came to town, filmed the students there, and this set off what appears to be a controversy that still simmers today.
It goes on forever. About 3 weeks ago, there was a class reunion from that very time, 66, 67. And they're still sore about it.
What made this such a huge controversy?
Well, I think CBS maybe came in with a little bit of a pre-agenda, that this is a rich suburb, but as it was back then, it was in the top 3 in St. Louis as far as income. And so, they made it look materialistic, that everybody's on the make, that all the kids have to toe the line so they can get good grades to go to great colleges. Meantime, they're ignoring what's going on around them. They're not protesting the Vietnam War. They're not engaged in civil rights. The parents came off pretty stodgy. But
do you think that was accurate, this portrayal in that documentary?
Oh, yeah. I actually do. And, I get a lot of pushback on that. But I don't think it's a bad thing for a town to be engaged in a little bit of self-analysis,
Yeah.
And I think it had a big impact on them, and I think it was a positive impact.
It kind of changed. It had to think about these issues after it was kind of exposed this way.
Exactly, and but I get a kick out of the old timers who just can't let it go.
Yeah.
So if, 20 years ago, Dan Rather was in town doing the presidential election thing, interviewing people on the street, and this lady got in his face, pointing her finger at him, and she goes, "That 16 in Webster Groves wasn't fair to us." And poor Rather, he finally had to say, "Lady, the statute of limitations has run out on that."
I love that. I mean, he's good with a quip. But I think it's a real question. When we put out this morning on social media that we were going to talk to you, we're trying to stir up maybe a little conversation here, asked if Webster Groves was indeed the queen of the suburbs. We got a response from Tom. He grew up in U-City, but he lived in Webster from 2003 to 2013. He writes this on Twitter: "Have you seen 16 in Webster Groves? It felt to me like a lot of that remained." And again, he was there decades later. Tom continues, "I met a lot of people who'd grown up in Webster Groves and never left or came back to raise their families. Some of them still referred to the area off Rock Hill Road north of Lockwood as quote-unquote Brown Town. There was definitely a Delmar-like divide between North Webster Groves and South Webster Groves, some black-white, much liberal/conservative, YMCA/country club. Take your pick." Tom adds, "Maybe things have changed since I left." So we want to hear from you. Has Webster changed? Is Webster the queen of the suburbs? What makes it great? What makes it not so great? You can call us at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us a tweet at STL on air. What do you think of what Tom was saying about those divides? Do you see those today?
I think you got to go back in history and see what happened when, along Marshall and Gore. I mean, when the plantations ended and the blacks moved down to the bottom of the hill, they were kind of pushed there, but they did so much with that area, and they become an important part of the community, and there isn't as much of that divide as there was. I mean, back in the Douglas school days, there was segregation. Mm-hmm. When Brown v. Board happened, then slowly, but it was painful. It was painful for both sides.
Yeah.
But I think overall, if you look at the big picture, they've made so much progress. But I don't think you should forget the history. I don't think you should forget the sad parts. That's one thing 16 Webster Groves did. They interviewed the 2 black students who gave them their opinions, and not everybody liked it. I mean, but if you want to talk about incorporating systematic racism, when the football player said, I really like playing football because beneath all this helmet and all this uniform stuff, they can't tell what color I am. So, and I'm thinking, if anybody doubts that there's such a thing as systematic racism, that a kid can incorporate that in himself.
Yeah.
Now, I think we're over that period in Webster Groves High School. But, it takes time.
Yeah.
Progress takes time.
Something else we heard on social media, people talking about this idea of Webster sort of standing athwart history and saying, stop. Jim writes on Twitter, less the queen of suburbs and more the queen of opposing any and all development. Is that sort of NIMBY spirit alive and well in Webster?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But, I think they're very thoughtful about what they want. They're very nervous about keeping their character.
Yeah.
And the latest development that came in on Gore and Lockwood, that
was a big development.
They said, we don't want to be Clayton.
Yeah.
We don't want these tall buildings here. So I think you have to respect that. And I also think that they were conscious of the history of developments and the fact that there's going to be all this water runoff into the North Webster area. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that goes back to their sort of sensitivity to the fact that they have this historic community and they don't want it to leave.
Yeah.
They don't want gentrification. It's a part of the town. They're proud of the folks that are there. They get along, not all the time, but as part of what makes Webster Groves what it is.
It's interesting driving around today. You certainly don't see, that these smaller starter homes have been bulldozed. They've been preserved. Like you can still see a home that, has a bath and a half as opposed to, I don't know, there's perhaps other suburbs where it feels like you're seeing 6 bathrooms in every big McMansion along the street.
Right.
Do you feel like that goes sort of part and parcel with that same idea? They want to preserve this community, what it has been.
And oh my gosh, I admire them because I had one of those houses in Kirkwood, and between raking those leaves on those huge trees and, keeping up with plumbing that's 50 years old, I admire the Webster Groves folks. It's good for the hardware stores, too.
That is
because
true.
It's a lot of work to preserve that community and keep it looking like it is.
Yeah, and it does look good. So you wrote something interesting in the foreword to this book. You wrote, this town takes itself pretty seriously. Was that hard as a newspaper editor?
Oh, my gosh. Every Friday, the phone rang off the hook. I mean, if they weren't upset about where the paper got thrown, they were upset about the headline, they were upset about somebody wasn't included in the story. Yeah, it gets a little crazy. And boy, was I in trouble when I didn't show up on Friday because everybody else was taking the phone calls.
They
and
needed
saying,
someone to vent to.
Don, that's your job.
That's great. So people read this paper. People really took seriously what was in it.
Well, the controversies that they've gone through, from sensible gun laws to the development issues to where they're going to put the next restaurant, reassessment every 2 years, it rears its ugly head.
Yeah. You cover that in the book.
Yeah, and then I love that they, even during the middle of a pandemic and all these other things, they have time to argue about belly buttons.
Belly buttons, this is in schools.
Midriff.
Can young ladies show their navels? I don't think any young men want to show theirs, and that's a good thing. Let's just say. So, a lot of controversies. A lot of controversies in the Webster-Kirkwood Times. And we are talking today to its editor emeritus. That is Don Corrigan. His new book is Amazing Webster Groves. We should mention Don has 2 readings coming up, both on June 9th. One early in the day from noon to 1 p.m. at the Shepherd Center, then one that evening at the Novel Neighbor. We have details for that on our website. That's stlonair.show. I want to go back to the phone lines. Clark is calling from Webster Groves, has some thoughts on this. Clark, hi, you're on St. Louis on the Air.
Hey, thank you very much. And Sarah, so sorry to see you go, but
Thank you, Clark.
Good luck to you in the future. Yes. Don, I have not bought your book yet, but I plan on picking up a copy today, actually. And
Well,
just
thank
wanted
you,
to
Clark.
circle back a little bit on the North Webster, South Webster divide. I think that it is a little bit more ingrained than we like to talk about. And I think that, unfortunately, our black population is decreasing in percentage. We're down to about 4% now. And we had in the low double digits previously. So we're going in the wrong direction. We're becoming whiter and more gentrified, and it's really saddening to me. I've lived here about 22 years, but it's really pretty saddening. And I think a lot of the young people, my kids included, don't want to move back here because of the trending and how we're becoming whiter and more affluent. So.
Clark, thank you for sharing those thoughts. That's interesting to hear, and that this might be something that's a turnoff to young people. I can see that. I'm going to go back to the phone lines. Heath is calling from Webster Groves as well. Heath, hi. You're on St. Louis on the Air.
Yeah, hi. My name is Heath. I moved to Webster in 2008 when just before we had our first child, who is now 13 and a half, and he's going to be an 8th grader at Hickson next year. And we have another, soon-to-be 5th grader at Avery Elementary. I heard, this discussion about sort of the NIMBY attitudes in Webster, which I definitely see going on. There was a lot of opposition to this Douglas Hill development. There was a strong vocalized opposition against duplex ordinance, which would have affected a very small amount of the city. It was not a citywide ordinance. It was, you get kind of into wonky details there, but there's a lot of hay made out of very little. And I think sort of this notion that Webster has has decided not to be Clayton, I think is very true. But I think the opposite is that we don't get to remain Webster of the 1950s, which had affordable housing for working class families. Like, we can't go back to that.
That's changed. No matter what Webster has done, that's shifted.
But the fact that there are so many people like you that are aware of this and are thinking about it is I think, a plus for the town, and you could make a difference in Webster Groves on those kinds of issues.
Heath, do you feel like people are open to you kind of trying to push that? Like, hey, we could use some more affordable housing here.
I think people are open to it, but then they say that they are open to more affordable housing, but then when the rubber meets the road of actually putting the affordable housing somewhere, then you see a lot of opposition come up. We just had a relatively new building built where our old YMCA was located. There was vocal opposition to that. There's a United Church of Christ on Lockwood property that is coming up for sale. I imagine that will, probably someone will want to build apartments there, and there will probably be vocal opposition to that.
Heath, thank you for sharing that perspective. I think he's probably predicting correctly. There would be vocal opposition to that. But Don, you feel like Webster is at least having these conversations.
Yes, and I don't totally disagree with what he has to say. I remember when Sholin Brothers burnt down, and there was this big space that all of a sudden became available, and we covered both sides. We didn't take a position, but I feel like, an opportunity was lost there because they rejected a development that would have been very much like Kirkwood's, the other queen of the suburbs, where everybody meets and they're outside and they're near the iconic train station and all that. And they sort of rejected that, too. It was sort of a NIMBY thing. And now, what do they have? They have like a bunch of banks, and I've got nothing against banks. We need them.
Yeah, but that could have been cooler.
Yeah, it could have been cooler.
That's a missed opportunity right there. Well, it's interesting to think about this city, and I know, Don, you have many conversations about this as you continue to do these book readings and events. I think one of the other things that we would be remiss not to talk about, there's some amazing local lore in this book. You got to tell us about the lawn chair drill team of Helfenstein Avenue.
I hope they're practicing now. And that just goes with the Community Days parade. I mean, what parade do you have these people that are like doing drills with lawn chairs? And, it's unbelievable. But I just have the greatest admiration for the city officials in Webster Groves because every year it's a controversy. And after it's over, people say, well, why wasn't the Republican float, why did that why wouldn't the Democrat float in front of it? Or why wasn't that? Or why did these people at the last minute? Or I think I mentioned the Baton Bob controversy when he showed up uninvited and was in his usual dress that upset people.
Who knew that Community Days was so fraught? But in Webster Groves, it has been.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one time they had the 9/11 conspiracy theorists with the Twin Towers on a float going down, and they were handing out videos of what the true story is behind the Twin Towers, and that upset a lot of people, but it's First Amendment, free speech, and so that's what we have to deal with. And frankly, as a newsman, I think it's one of the things that makes it kind of fun. But I really do sympathize with the city officials who have to take all the flack on that.
This is not easy.
It's a great tradition, though. The July 4th parade and the festival that the Lions put on down by the pool and stuff. It's really Rockwell Americana July 4th, which is coming up soon. And that Helfenstein Brigade, they better be out there doing their thing.
They better be ready for their drill team dance. Well, Don Corrigan, I'm sure that you miss editing this newspaper every day as opposed to the emeritus role you've taken on. Just always a controversy in Webster Groves. There's so much good there. Maybe, also some things that aren't so good, but we're just going to leave it at that. Don Corrigan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Today's episode was produced by Sarah Fensky with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our production intern is Avery Rogers. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com